The principal's office was too bright that afternoon, the sunlight spilling through half-closed blinds and striping the polished desk. 3 parents sat stiffly across from Mrs. Klein, their voices low at first but growing sharper with each exchange. One of them, a man in an expensive gray suit, leaned forward. "We're only thinking about the school's reputation," he said. "This international debate is a serious stage. We need a student who sounds professional." A woman with pearl earrings nodded quickly. "Exactly. Jalen's a good kid, I'm sure, but the accent." She lowered her voice, though not enough. "It's distracting. Hard to follow. My daughter says no one takes him seriously when he speaks." The third parent sighed dramatically, as though speaking the final truth. "Why risk embarrassing ourselves? Surely there's another student better suited for this." Mrs. Klein pressed her lips together. She had heard versions of this before, complaints that were never about ability, always about something else. Jalen was one of the brightest debaters she had ever seen. He had an instinct for arguments, a passion that burned through his words. But none of that seemed to matter to the people sitting before her. Just outside the office, Jalen stood frozen, the strap of his backpack digging into his shoulder. He hadn't meant to overhear. But the voices carried through the thin wooden door, and every word landed like a stone in his chest. "The accent is distracting. No one takes him seriously. Surely there's someone better." His throat tightened. That accent, the one they despised, was the voice of his family at the dinner table, of his grandmother telling stories late at night. It was the rhythm of where he came from. But here, in this place, it was being turned into a reason to silence him. He took a shaky breath and stepped back from the door, each word echoing in his head as he walked down the hall. The laughter of other students rang in the distance, carefree and light, but for Jalen the world had grown unbearably heavy. For the first time, he wondered if his dream of standing on a stage and commanding an audience was something he was never meant to reach. Jalen had always been in love with words. When he was small, his mother would read poetry to him at night, not in English, but in the flowing, lilting rhythm of their homeland. The words carried music, even if young Jalen didn't always understand them fully. His father, quieter but determined, would drill him in English at the dinner table. "Say it again. Slower. Stronger." Jalen's siblings would laugh, but his father's eyes shone with pride. By the time he was 10, Jalen could switch between languages with ease. But the accent lingered, stitched into the fabric of his speech. At home, it was a badge of identity. At school, it became a target. Classmates would imitate him when he answered a question. "Say that again," they'd tease, exaggerating every syllable until the whole table laughed. Teachers sometimes spoke to him slower, as if he couldn't quite keep up. He learned to keep his head down, but inside, he burned. Then he discovered debate. It started with a flyer taped to a classroom door: "Debate team tryouts, find your voice." Jalen remembered staring at those words for a long time, as if they had been written for him alone. He tried out nervously, his palms sweaty, his voice cracking in the first round. But when it came time to argue, something inside him shifted. His words poured out, measured, logical, but also alive. His accent didn't disappear, but it didn't matter. His arguments landed, his confidence grew, and his voice, his true voice, emerged. From that day, he was hooked. He stayed late in the library, watching recordings of world-class debaters, scribbling notes in his battered notebook. He practiced in front of the mirror, rehearsing hand movements, learning to pause at just the right moment. He didn't want to sound like anyone else, he wanted to sound like himself. And every time he doubted, he remembered what his grandmother told him before they left their homeland: "Your voice is your power. Never let anyone take it from you." Still, the complaints he'd overheard at the principal's office echoed in his mind. He could study for hours, refine every argument, but would it matter if people dismissed him the moment he opened his mouth? For the first time, Jalen wondered if passion was enough, or if his accent would forever chain him to the shadows. The debate team gathered in the library on a gray Wednesday afternoon. Bookshelves lined the walls, the smell of paper and ink heavy in the air. Students clustered around the long table, their laptops open, their notes scattered. Everyone knew what this meeting was about. Ms. Ramirez would announce who would represent Brookfield High at the Global Youth Debate Championship. Jalen sat at the end of the table, shoulders hunched, pretending to study his notes. He could feel the whispers sliding past him. "They won't pick him," one boy muttered. "Not with that accent," another whispered back. Ms. Ramirez entered, her presence instantly commanding the room. She was a woman who didn't waste words, who could cut through excuses with a glance. She set her papers down and looked at each student in turn. "This is not just about speaking clearly," she began, her voice firm. "It's about ideas. About courage. About who can stand in front of the world and make people listen." The room quieted. Jalen's heart pounded. She let the silence hang before continuing. "I've made my choice. The student who will represent us is Jalen Carter." Jalen's head snapped up. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. A ripple of shock spread across the table. One girl's mouth fell open. A boy at the far end scoffed loudly. "Are you serious?" he demanded. "He's just going to embarrass us. No one will even understand him." Ms. Ramirez's eyes cut toward the boy, sharp as glass. "Enough," she said, her tone low and final. "Jalen has earned this. He doesn't need to sound like you to be brilliant. And when he speaks, people listen. That's what matters." Jalen swallowed hard, his face hot, but inside him something shifted. For weeks, he'd carried the weight of other people's doubt. Now, for the first time, someone had pushed back against it. He wasn't just being tolerated. He was being chosen. The announcement spread quickly. By the next day, the hallways buzzed with disbelief. "Did you hear?" one student whispered at his locker. "They picked Jalen." "Jalen." Another laughed. "Guess they want us to lose." Jalen tried to ignore them, but the words dug deep. In the cafeteria, two boys from the team exaggerated his accent as he walked past, clutching their trays. "Ladies and gentlemen," one said in a mocking drawl, "I am here to lose gracefully on behalf of my school." The table burst into laughter. Jalen kept walking, his jaw tight, his fists buried in his pockets. At night, in his room, he practiced until his voice cracked. He stood before the mirror, notebook in hand, rehearsing his opening lines. Every mistake felt enormous, every mispronunciation a scar. Sometimes, he would slam the notebook shut and throw himself on the bed, whispering, "Why am I even trying? They're right. No one will take me seriously." One evening, his mother overheard him. She knocked gently and entered, setting a steaming cup of tea on his desk. "Jalen," she said softly, sitting beside him, "do you know what I hear when you speak?" He shook his head, his throat tight. "I hear strength. I hear your father. I hear your grandmother. I hear the voice of where you come from, carried across an ocean. Your accent isn't a weakness, it's a history. It's proof of survival. Don't erase it. Use it." Her words sank deeper than any insult ever could. The next day, Jalen returned to practice with a new resolve. He stopped trying to flatten his voice, to sand it down into something it wasn't. Instead, he leaned into it. His cadence became deliberate, his pauses powerful, his words heavy with conviction. When Ms. Ramirez heard him rehearse again, she leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. "That," she said, nodding, "is the voice that's going to win." Still, the pressure gnawed at him. The competition was approaching fast, and Jalen knew the world would be watching. He had one chance to prove that his voice, the very thing people mocked, was the thing that could carry him to victory. The auditorium was enormous, larger than anything Jalen had ever seen. Rows upon rows of seats climbed into the shadows, filled with students from across the globe. Flags draped over shoulders, voices in dozens of languages blended into a low, restless hum. At the very front sat the judges, stoic, serious, pens poised over their score sheets. Jalen stood backstage, his palms damp, his heart hammering so loudly he thought everyone must hear it. The strap of his debate folder dug into his shoulder, but he clutched it like a lifeline. "Next speaker," the announcer's voice boomed, "representing Brookfield High, United States, Jalen Carter." The words echoed in his head. His stomach dropped. He stepped forward. The stage lights blazed, so bright he could barely make out the faces in the crowd. For one terrifying moment, his mind went blank. He remembered the boys at school laughing, the parents at the principal's office saying he would embarrass them. He gripped the podium. His first words came out shaky. "Good afternoon, esteemed judges, fellow debaters." A ripple of fear shot through him, but then, like a lifeline, he heard his mother's voice in his memory. "Your accent is not weakness. It is history. It is strength." He inhaled deeply. This time, when he spoke, he let his voice settle into its natural rhythm, measured, deliberate, strong. His accent didn't fade, it carried. Each word landed with weight. He spoke of unity, of how language was not a barrier but a bridge. He argued that the power of an idea wasn't in the smoothness of the voice that delivered it, but in its truth. He wove in history, science, literature, making his case airtight yet passionate. At first, the audience was still. Then they leaned in. Even the judges looked up from their notes. By the end, the entire hall seemed to be holding its breath. When Jalen delivered his closing line, "Our differences are not flaws. They are the proof that we all belong on the same stage." The silence lingered for a heartbeat. And then came the applause. Not polite, not restrained. A wave of sound, rising, rolling, filling the auditorium until it shook the walls. Jalen stepped back from the podium, chest heaving, his eyes shining. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of how he sounded. He was proud of it. Jalen sat in the second row, knees bouncing, his fingers intertwined so tightly his knuckles were white. Around him, students murmured in quiet suspense. The judges had stepped out to deliberate 15 minutes ago, but it felt like hours. Ms. Ramirez leaned over, her voice calm. "No matter what happens, you've already done what most people couldn't." Jalen nodded, but said nothing. His heart was still back on the stage, every word he'd spoken, every moment he thought he might lose control, every face he dared not look at while speaking. Then the head judge returned. She stepped up to the podium, a small card in her hand. The auditorium fell into silence. "We were truly moved," she began, "not just by argument, but by authenticity. This year's winner reminded us all that power doesn't come from perfection, but from courage." Jalen's breath caught. The judge looked down, then smiled. "The winner of the Global Youth Debate Competition is Jalen Carter, representing Brookfield High." There was a moment of stunned stillness. And then, the crowd erupted. Ms. Ramirez gasped audibly. Students from other schools stood, applauding, some even cheering. Cameras flashed. Judges clapped. Jalen didn't move at first. He was frozen, stunned. It wasn't a dream. He'd won. He stood slowly, walked up the steps, and received the trophy with shaking hands. The judge leaned in as she handed it to him. "You didn't hide your voice," she said. "You used it. That's why you're here." Jalen turned to face the crowd, and for the first time, he saw their eyes, not filled with pity or condescension, but respect. His accent hadn't held him back. It had carried him forward. And the world had listened. Jalen walked through the front doors of Brookfield High on Monday morning, the Global Debate Trophy tucked carefully in his backpack. The same hallways where he once felt invisible now felt different, charged with something he couldn't quite name. Students glanced up as he passed, and for once, their looks weren't mocking or dismissive. A few even nodded at him, or smiled. The laughter that once followed him after every presentation was gone. He turned a corner and nearly collided with a group of students from the debate team. They paused, awkwardly at first, then one of them, Eli, the loudest of his past critics, stepped forward and extended a hand. "You were incredible," he said, voice lower than usual. "You earned it." Jalen shook his hand. He didn't need an apology. The truth had already spoken louder. In class, teachers mentioned the competition, using his performance as an example of resilience and excellence. In English, his debate was played on the projector. Some students watched silently, others nodded, visibly moved. But the most unexpected moment came during the school assembly. The principal took the stage, called Jalen up, and told the entire school about his achievement, not just the win, but the journey. He spoke with conviction, clarity, she said, and yes, with his accent. That voice is now known around the world. The applause was long and loud. Jalen looked out over the sea of faces, many of which had once looked down on him, and he stood tall. Not in spite of his accent, but because of it. As the assembly ended, a younger student approached him shyly. "I have an accent too," she said. "Do you think I could join debate someday?" Jalen smiled. Not someday. This year. He knew now that his voice wasn't something to fix. It was something to raise. And he would help others do the same.